Hi, students. I am so excited to share with you today a Q&A with Dr. Franklin, the ADD for our ophthalmology department, and Dr. Moore, the program director for our ophthalmology residency program. As many of you know, we have lots of national level data on research involvement and what that might mean for the match and for your careers. Sometimes it's really hard to parse through that big data and figure out what are the actual tips that I should be following for the programs that I'm considering. So these folks are going to give us the inside scoop on the UK ophthalmology program. Thank you all for being with me today. Before we get started, is there anything either of you would like to share about yourselves? I'm sure students might get to know you interested in ophthalmology, but they may not have met you yet.
Sure. So I'm Dr. Lucy Franklin, and I am the ADD or Advanced Development Director. So I meet a lot of the med students, especially those who are interested in ophthalmology, even as early as their M1 year. And so I always encourage students, if you have questions or interest, please feel free to reach out. But a lot of my role really focuses on helping students to navigate from as early as M1, that interest in ophthalmology, whether that be through shadowing, trying to help, set you up with research, and working in our outpatient clinics, all the way through to the process of applying for residency. And so I get to spend a lot of time, getting to know our students, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, and I'm Danny Moore. I'm the residency program director, and so my role really officially takes place after you match. But like Lucy, I enjoy working with students, and so getting to know you as you're here, a much more informal basis. She is this person that you'll get to meet and interact with the most, and you're very fortunate to have her. But I also am heavily involved in the recruitment and trying to determine who gets into our program, which is a group-based effort. But as a program director, I have a bigger say and probably some extra insight into some of that process.
And Dr. Moore, students are maybe more familiar with what ADDs do. Can you share just a little bit about what it means to be a program director and kind of what's the man or woman power behind these residency programs for students to have that insight?
Yeah, so as the director, I'm the physician leader. The person behind everything, though, is going to be the coordinator. So that's the administrator in charge of the program. And in ophthalmology, we're lucky to have a very wonderful person. So there's always someone else behind the scenes that's running the ship. And in our case, that's our coordinator. But as the program director, I'm in charge of the day-to-day operations of the program, liaising with the residents and with the GME office and then with our own faculty, and really trying to make sure that things are going the way they're supposed to.
And I know ophthalmology is a little bit different than some specialties. Can you share some context for what the ophthalmology match is like?
Yeah, I'll give me feel that one. Okay, so we are a what's called early match program. So our match is not on the typical day in March, and I believe you can still enjoy that day with your M4 colleagues, but you'll know several months in advance that you got into an ophthalmology program. There's a variety of reasons why that exists, and none of them make any sense to me. So we're just being unique for the sake of it. The other thing that's a little bit different is that we use SF Match as our program for matching as opposed to ARIS or NMRP. And we're one of only two residency programs, and then there's quite a few fellowship programs that use SF Match, but it's not that many. The program and the application itself is somewhat similar, but there's going to be some unique aspects to ophthalmology within the matching system.
All right. And again, thinking about maybe an M1 who doesn't know much about the match at all, can you share a little bit about what type of data you're looking at in addition to research that might matter for how you evaluate candidates?
Do you want me to take that one, Lillian? So I think, on the whole, our program likes to do a pretty, what we refer to as a holistic review of applicants. And so trying to see just how well-rounded an applicant is. And so when I meet with students, even as early as M1, M2, I think it's really important to focus on making sure you're trying to, I don't know if you want to think about it like putting something in all the different pots. So academics, you want to make sure that you're really focusing on that. I think that's a really important one. Even if you're in a pass-fail system, I think still trying to do as much as you can to learn as much as you can in their M1 and M2 years. That really builds the foundation that will help you to shine in your M3, M4 years. And that often I talk about that translates into your step scores, even though step one is not scored, it's pass fail, but that will, translate into a better performance there. And then that shows up again on the wards and on step two. And when you take those MB, ME shelf exams throughout your M3, M4 rotations. So I think that that is still really, really important. And then your extracurriculars, and I always tell students to choose things that they're really interested in because I think you're going to be more likely to follow through and continue with those. And then that can be, there's a whole wide range of things, and our students always have these amazing, incredible things that they do in their their free time, spare time, if you want to call it that. And then research is definitely one of the important things too. And it's becoming more important in the last few years as we've seen changes with the application process, including that step one becoming pass fail. But so I try to encourage students to really try and look at those things and try and make sure they've got something for each of those categories, because that's what your application is going to ask about. And so you don't really want to have blank spots.
Thanks, Dr. Franklin. And zooming in on that a little bit, I know students hear that research is typically expected for a specialty like ophthalmology, and sometimes I'll hear that they're worried that they'll just be screened out, that they won't even make it past application stage if they don't have a certain number of research outcomes, or maybe the national average that they're seeing in the data that we can share. Can you speak to how flexible things might or might not be for students that maybe don't have a ton of research and that's something they're really worried about?
So I think that, every program is different. Dr. Moore and I were talking about this, that, really depending on what program you're looking at, you might get a very different answer. And so it is becoming the basically standard that you probably need to have research. I think it would be very difficult anymore to not have any research involvement and to match. That really would lower your chance. But I will say that our program, like I mentioned, we try to look at things holistically. There are a lot of schools in this country that don't have a home ophthalmology program. And so I don't think it's fair to, look at a student from a program or a scenario like that who may not have as much access to research, and just say, no, we're not even going to consider this. So I think that pretty much, most everybody, we at least review and try and look at things in the context of where they are. But if you're looking at a program that is more research heavy, research based, then I think that you need to be considering what your application looks like in terms of the research that you've done. So I think it would be hard to say that you would just get no review if you had no research, but I do think that that is at least something that you need to be considering trying to get involved in to some degree at this point.
And this may help or may not, but there's kind of two different areas when it comes to recruitment. There's the application and the review of the application, and then there's the interview and then the rank decision. So the application review is taking all the people that apply to your program and selecting the ones that would be worthwhile, you think, to interview. And then the interview is the chance to really get to meet and to know these people a little bit more intimately, to look at their application more closely, and then determine if this is someone that seems like they'd be a good fit for your program. And of course, you as the applicant, you're doing the opposite, or you're doing it from the other perspective. But the research, it serves different roles in those two arenas. So at UK, we have a committee that will review applications. And I would say, and Lucy, tell me if you feel otherwise, that most of the faculty will just glance to see if you have research. They're not going to look at it really detailed. So is there something in this section? Have you filled it out? Is there something there? And that's where you're really going to be hurt if it's blank. But if it's been done, then for at least at us at UK, that gets you into the next round, which is the interview. And then during the interview, that's when the research probably will play a more prominent role. Other institutions and other programs, particularly those that are more research heavy, may not do that. They may look very closely at the research in the application phase. So off the bat, they're going to be looking at the quantity and quality of your projects more so than more clinically focused programs like UK might.
That makes sense. And one more question along those lines in the application stage. Students, especially at the M1 year, are often really struggling with, do I put all my time into a big longitudinal project that will hopefully yield a publication authorship? Or do I maybe take a safer strategy with a little bit low risk, low reward, and I'm going to get several conference authorships or lower in the author list? Probably not going to get a first author result or a publication. It sounds like, at least for UK, at the application stage, that may not be a deal breaker, but do y'all have general advice for students trying to weigh those decisions?
Yeah, so I think I tell students, I mean, and I really do honestly believe that quality over quantity is really important. But I will say, I think that what we try to do when we are pairing students with faculty to look at trying to get research, that we do look at trying to pair them with people who may be able to get them to a conference or to work towards a publication. So I think on our side, we are trying to take those types of things into account because, like Dr. Moore said, and I think he does a fantastic job of having us really look at all the different parts of the application. So I do think that that is not a super big hindrance, but you don't want it to be empty, like you said. I think that if you're able to work on a really high quality longitudinal project that may get you some conferences, maybe not a first author or a peer reviewed publication, if you're working on that, but then also maybe you can do a couple smaller things just to help to make that section look a little bit more populated when someone's reviewing it. Because that's, I mean, we are humans looking at these and not just running them through a system. So we can see and on our applications in the SF match, there's a section that lists the publications, but there's also sections that talk about your research experiences. So you're able to actually write out, okay, I spent this many hours, I meant this many years, these were all the jobs I did working on this research project. So there's ways to kind of flesh that out even if you didn't have a bunch of publications from it.
That makes sense.
So
Let's
when you're
go.
applying, it's going to be in the summer after your M3 year. And if you just start working backwards, if you're going to have a publication, that project has to be done probably at least 6 months before that, which means you had to have started on it, sometime prior to that. So these are things that you have to be doing during M1, M2, and M3, which is really hard when you're considering all the other things that you all are doing right now, on top of trying to figure out what specialty you may be interested in and doing research in that specialty. So that to just emphasize what Dr. Franklin was saying, I think there's an awareness, hopefully, on most of the faculty's perspective that you have a very small, short window to get these things done. And even if you don't have a project to completion, demonstrating that you're working on things is really helpful.
That makes great sense. Let's talk about interview stage kind of generally here. Let's say I've applied, I've gotten an interview. What are some ways that you've seen students' research experiences really shine at the interview stage, or maybe hurt them a little bit at the interview stage? Any general insight there?
Can we start? Okay. I would say what helps is projects. I think anything that's of interest to the person interviewing you is going to be helpful. So that is just sometimes hit or miss luck. Like this is their area of expertise, or you did something that was really interesting that you didn't even know was interesting. You just lucked into it. So those are things that you are likely can't control. But what you can control is the degree to which you understand your own research and how you can describe it. Because invariably, when you're on an interview, there are going to be some faculty that want to know about this exact project, and they'll get down into the weeds. I mean, I doubt many people are going to be asking you about the p-value of this, but they'll want to understand why you're doing it and what you found, and then what you'd be able to just demonstrate that you have a awareness of what happened, and you can talk about it. And the better you can talk about it, the more interesting you make it, the better you come off. So whatever research you put on paper, make sure you've thought through and have practiced how you want to talk about it. I think that can really help. And I think the opposite can really be a hindrance.
On that note, we were talking earlier about students who were wondering how many times to present the same research. Dr. Franklin, I think you had some great insight there in terms of not wanting to just reinvent the wheel or kind of do the same thing for no reason. What's your general advice there for students deciding how many times or how many different avenues to put the same research out there and how that might come across to an evaluator?
Yeah, so like I said, I mean, we review a lot of applications, and I get it. I get that there's a lot of stress, especially around the research area for students. But there are sometimes we'll see an application that has the same exact project listed 15 different times, which I get it. If that's really your only project, that's fine. But I do think that there is, maybe some limit. I think it would be and a lot of times they're fantastic projects, but I think, if there's a publication and then a couple big conferences that you have presented that one project for, that's probably sufficient. If you want to, it's fine. It's probably not going to hurt anything, but we are reading them and can read that it's probably the same thing over and over. So I think at that point, listing a couple other things, just so we're not reading that you've just had, I don't know, it becomes obvious after about 7 lists of the same project that it's, that you've done kind of one project. So I think students can find other places to shine in their application. If you're somebody who's really service oriented, which we see that a lot, and I think that focusing on those things rather than trying to space fill with the same thing is probably more beneficial to you in your application because we see those things too. And I really, I get that. I think there are a lot of people who really shine academically, and that's great. And I think there are a lot of people who shine in community service or leadership. And so knowing what your strengths are is also really important in that process too.
I appreciate that sort of reality check that your goal is to capture what you're passionate about, what you can tell a good story about, something that would help you connect with an interviewer versus to accrue a certain number of outcomes or metrics. Like these are real people wanting to connect with you, right?
Yeah, no, and that really is it's a great point because I tell our students all the time that that application, it's like 20 to 30 pages, and that's all that we get to know who someone is. And so it's really, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, that's really not a lot. And so I think that putting as much information, um, different information that gives us a snapshot about who you are as a person, that's what we're using to say, okay, I want to get to know this person more. And so for me, reading the same project over and over doesn't tell me anything different about who you are, where I could get a lot more information from other sections. So.
Thank you about that. My last few questions are just general strategy for students deciding what to get involved in. A big one I hear is maybe an undecided student. Maybe they're thinking ophthalmology or something else, and they're worried that if they do research in a different area, they would be looked down on by the specialty that they eventually choose. Can y'all share how you view students who, especially as M1s and M2s, do research in different areas? Is it weighted equally? Is it looked down on? What are you looking for there that they should avoid or make sure that they do?
I would say kind of back to that prior point about the very condensed timeline you have to conduct research. Hopefully, most faculty at most programs will be aware of that, and that you've demonstrated an interest in any research is far better than first off none, but certainly is still a great way to highlight that you have this as part of your application. This is part of who you are. And if you have projects that come to completion in other areas and you're just starting some projects in ophthalmology, that may be an area where they can get an awareness that you switched later. And and that's not a problem. That's not a red flag. That's normal for people to explore and then go in different directions. And so that you can demonstrate that not only in a personal statement or a narrative, but also in the way your research has evolved over medical school, I think can be very powerful.
I hope there's a lot of students who will breathe a sigh of relief to hear that. Just to reiterate, you don't have to know your specialty your first semester of med school, we promise.
Or
All
before.
right, my last very granular question. Sometimes students are worried about doing different types of research. So QI, med ed, bench work, clinical, case reports, and they're wondering if certain things are valued or perceived as more important. Any insight on how y'all view different types of research?
Yeah, so I think that Dr. Moore and I and Dr. Oberst, who's our APD, talk about this a lot in terms of I think most of what we want to see in someone doing research is, okay, are you committing to a project And then are you following through? Are you producing quality work? Because I think for a lot of us, those are really the characteristics that we're looking for in a good resident. You know, somebody who is going to work hard, follow through, and do what they say they're going to do. Because that's what patients need. You know, it's all big picture stuff. And so if that comes across in your research, you know, I think obviously there's a reason peer reviewed is listed at the top. I mean, if you can get those things, great. But again, kind of back to that, you know, looking at people in the context of what they have available, you know, I don't think it's a discredit if you only have, you know, second author or beyond, no peer reviewed. So for me, I look more at the research experiences and how they describe what they've done. But again, that's probably not the same for every program across the country.
True. And Dr. Moore, I think you had some insight on case reports in particular. What was it you had seen with those before?
Oh, I think Dr. Franklin and I both, and again, Lucy, tell me if I'm wrong, but that if you just have case reports only, that's probably a little bit lower level than other research. And you know, it's the dedication, the longitudinal exposure that is something that seems to be more worthwhile. Again, fully recognizing that you can only do what you're provided, and that we want to be aware of that at UK and other institutions as well. Um, I would just like to plug QI because that certainly is an evolving area. As faculty, QI is not something that we were ever trained in as med students, so we're learning more about it as we go along too, but it is something that's required of our residents. And so it is certainly an area of emphasis. And these are projects that don't require as much rigor necessarily as traditional research, but still can be put on your application and potentially be even more relevant to the faculty that are reviewing you, because it's great if you publish this esoteric study on this gene product, but if you can show that you decrease clinic wait times or you increase patient clinical education in this venue, like that's something that as a faculty member, I can learn from. Like, and that's part of the joy of interviewing is I can learn about you, but I also can learn from you as an applicant. So those kind of projects really do carry more weight than I think we realize.
That's fantastic to hear. You guys are so quotable. I hope students are writing down all of this insight. Before we go, is there anything that you would have liked to share for students to kind of be planning ahead that we haven't covered?
I think, Danny, you know, we were talking about that there's really great resources. Sfmatch.org, our website where our match occurs, has a ton of fantastic data, including the match statistics, which can be a little bit overwhelming. And actually, our APD, Dr. Oberst, did a blog post recently kind of breaking all of that stuff down. And then aupo.org is another one that I send a lot of our students to get information. That's the Association of University Professors of Ophthalmology. That's a really helpful website. And I'll just say, I wish that students didn't have to make that decision because in medical school, especially in your first 2 years, you really should just be learning how to become a doctor. Right? So maybe the system will change, but it is what it is right now. And I hope students can maybe not stress too much.
And I appreciate your points earlier that it's not just a CV builder. Ideally, STEP being pass fail and our curriculum being pass fail frees up a little bandwidth to pursue a QI project or pursue something you're passionate about instead of just sort of frantically doing all the things. I hope that comes through at least for a good number of our students. Anything else we missed that you'd like to share, Dr. Moore?
Yeah, like just a couple quick things and then potentially try to negate those things. So as much as things are now pass fail, emphasis has changed, which is why we're having this conversation about research, as well as you students are likely aware, step two scores emphasis has also changed. And so especially in ophthalmology, which is now considered a relatively competitive specialty, your step two score is very important for making it through that first round of review for most programs. At UK, as we've emphasized, we're more holistic. We take note of that. It is part of a larger rubric we utilize. And so it's not something that screens you in or out. But for some programs, your step two score will absolutely be a cutoff for whether you get to be either reviewed by their program or not. And unfortunately, many programs aren't very upfront about saying what that is or if they even do so. But it's just to emphasize that step 2 score is still important. And step 2 scores are built based upon the clinical foundations of your first and second years. So you're not going to magically knock it out of the park if you aren't preparing all throughout those first couple of years. So as Dr. Franklin said, becoming a good doctor and doing the work in the clinical academic work is really important. The other thing is research numbers is on the website for SF Match. Publications, whether we like it or not, do have weight in ophthalmology, and I can't speak to other specialties, but it's true that in the past few years the volume of publications and how that impacts your probability of matching is definitely gone up, and they're correlated. The way I want to somewhat negate that is to say, at the end of the day, for us, what matters is that we are training someone who we think can take good care of patients. We want to train people who will be good doctors to us, to our family. And so whether you've done 16 projects, whether you knocked your boards out, how well you perform isn't necessarily going to be reflective of that. And so that's why we try to be a bit more holistic. And that's why we want to be very diligent about the folks that we mentor and interview, because we care about those basal qualities much more so than these things, which may have no bearing whatsoever on how good of a doctor you are. So as you are going through, and I can't even begin to try to put myself back into your shoes, but as you're going through all this stress and all this time and turmoil, just know that the people on the other side do care about how good you're going to be to other people more so than how well you do on a test.
Well said. Thank you all so much for your time. We really appreciate the insight.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you.